There is a specific kind of person. When their car breaks down on the side of the road, they don't call anyone. They pop the hood. They stand there, in the heat or the cold, staring at the engine, and something shifts in their face. Not panic, not frustration, something quieter, something that looks almost like relief. That moment is worth examining because the car isn't really the point. The car never was. Here's what most people misunderstand about this kind of person. They assume it's about mechanical skill, about knowing which part goes where. It's not. When someone learns to work on a machine as complex and unforgiving as an automobile, something happens to the architecture of their thinking. It doesn't happen in a classroom. It rarely happens from a book. It happens in a driveway, under a vehicle, with grease on their forearms, and a problem that will not cooperate. And that environment, that specific environment, does something to the brain that almost nothing else can. Neuroscientists have a term for it: embodied cognition. When a person diagnoses an engine fault, they're not just gathering information. They're constructing a mental model of an invisible system, holding sound, smell, behavior, and history and working memory simultaneously, cross-referencing it all against knowledge that was never stored in words. It was stored in muscle, in pattern recognition, in the particular silence that follows when a correctly seated bolt stops turning. Ask someone who has this skill how they knew the alternator was failing. They'll pause. They'll say, "It just felt wrong." They're not being vague. They are reporting accurately. The knowledge lives below language. And here's why that matters. People who know things below the level of language develop a specific bias. They start trusting their own perception over received authority. They've been in situations where the expert was wrong, where the manual didn't account for the specific wear pattern on this vehicle, where their own hands told them something no diagnostic tool could confirm. Over time, this doesn't become arrogance. It becomes an epistemology, a way of deciding what's true. But here's the part nobody talks about. Most people who learn to work on cars didn't learn from a manual. They learned in the presence of someone else, a parent, an uncle who said nothing but handed over a wrench and waited, a neighbor who showed rather than explained. There was no curriculum, no lesson plan. What was being transmitted wasn't technical knowledge. It was a relationship to difficulty, a way of being with a problem that did not involve walking away from it. The car was the medium. The real content was something harder to name. Psychologists call it internal locus of control, the belief that outcomes are primarily determined by your own effort and understanding, not by luck, not by other people's decisions. This belief changes everything. It changes how you approach a job, how you respond to setbacks, your tolerance for ambiguity. People who developed this in a garage, who learned early that machines respond to patient attention, that mastery is available to anyone willing to stay with difficulty long enough. They carry that belief into every room they walk into for the rest of their lives. And it was not given to them. It was built incrementally in the specific context of a machine that didn't work, and then, after sufficient effort, did. There's one more thing worth knowing. Working on a car is one of the last remaining contexts where a person can be completely, verifiably right. In most of modern life, success is ambiguous. Did the meeting go well? Hard to say. Is the project good? Depends who you ask. But an engine that was not running and now is running, that is not a matter of interpretation. The feedback is absolute. This is why the garage functions as psychological regulation. When the rest of life feels uncontrollable, when institutions fail, when relationships are complicated, when the future is opaque, the engine offers a bounded problem with a knowable solution. The person who retreats to the garage on a difficult Sunday is not avoiding their life. They are restoring something, rebuilding, in miniature, the experience of competence and clarity that the rest of the week may have eroded. What looks like a hobby is actually a coping strategy. What looks like a mechanical skill is actually a psychological one. And what looks like someone who knows about cars is actually someone who learned, in the most physical and irreversible way possible, that the world gives way to patient attention. So the question worth sitting with isn't whether you know how to fix an engine. The question is, what broken thing in your own life have you been standing in front of, hood up, waiting for someone else to come along and tell you what to do, when the answer was always going to require your own hands? Subscribe for more video.